Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Firefighters Podcast, where we seek to develop, inspire, and motivate the world of the emergency services operator through a series of wide-ranging conversations. Now, before we go any further, just hit that rate, follow, or subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to. It's a key performance indicator for us and helps us reach even more people. Now, here's what we've got for you today. My guest today is Colette Black, Director of People Services and Assistant Chief Executive at Essex County Fire and Rescue Service. Colette's responsible for people, values and culture, leadership and development, training, inclusion and diversity, industrial relations and people performance. Colette is a Chartered Fellow of the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development. She is educated at postgraduate level, is a qualified and nationally accredited mediator, qualified strength-based coach and postgraduate qualified executive coach. Colette is a particular interest in occupational psychology and recently completed research relating to psychological safety and positive action in the UK Fire and Rescue Service. Colette also plays an active role nationally with the National Fire Chiefs Council, leading on their culture, dashboard and people policies. Prior to joining the fire service back in 2017, Colette held a variety of HR and safeguarding roles as a director, consultant and business partner in the healthcare, public and charity sectors. She's got a lot of experience around transformational change, leading teams and managing large projects. This podcast was actually recorded back in August of 2024, and since then, Colette has gone on to receive the Most Influential Woman in Fire, which she won in December of 24. Throughout her career, she has been inspired and supported by many leaders and colleagues who have given her a tremendous amount of support and a platform to progress. There is still a lot of work to do to ensure that everyone in the Fire and Rescue Service has this same opportunity to thrive. In our conversation today, we're going to go into organisational strategy, positive action, and the challenges faced by the Fire and Rescue Service. Colette shares insights on her incredible research on misogyny, bullying and harassment in the Fire and Rescue Service and the need for psychologically safe environments. We also discuss the importance of context in organisational development and the balance we should have between positive and kind, whilst also focusing on high performance and accountability. We talk about a host of leadership styles, including situational leadership and coaching in how we develop our new leaders. We also talk about role models, belonging and the behaviours we need in creating a diverse and inclusive Fire and Rescue Service. We also explore the detail around what diversity really means and how we measure that as a success. Have we got quotas? Have we got targets? And overall, what does that balanced and diverse workforce look like? It's a real pleasure to have Colette on the podcast. We've had this one in the bank for a little bit and it's great to finally get it out there. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Colette Black. I'll see you on the other side. What do you think most people misunderstand when we're thinking about organisational development, organisational strategy, and the way that we develop our people?
We think context is one of the biggest omissions, usually. Okay. So there's a huge amount of theory around organisational development, learning and development, developing people. And a lot of it is transferable, but it needs to be grounded in our reality. So I think my one-word answer would be context, and then developing that further, it would be about ensuring that when we are developing our organisations and our people, that we really understand the context that we're operating in, whether that's political or organisational, economic, all of those things make an enormous difference. I would also say there's something about how far ahead we look. So it's very easy to be looking at the important and the urgent rather than the important. And so we need to be looking further.
The Eisenhower matrix.
Yes, absolutely. Exactly that.
I'm terrible for that. And I also think that's difficult for a lot of leaders. I mean, we're going through a very unique spot at the moment, aren't we? And it will come on to some of the elements we're speaking around in terms of recruitment and opportunities and development, because we're at a very, very unique sweet spot in this kind of 30, 35 year cycle where we are having a lot of retirement, hemorrhaging a lot of skill sets. That worries a lot of people. But I also, as the serial optimist, see that we are on the crest of a wave, because we spoke about Stephen Carver, that we both met at AFSA as well, where you first gave your talk, and I think it was very impactful to hear you speak there. He talks about the complexity of change, and we're at a very, very sweet spot where, because through happenstance, we're losing so much conditioned, sort of embedded, ingrained belief system. We're losing all of that, but it also, on the flip side of that coin, gives us probably the most unique opportunity in a generational shift that we're going to have if we all collectively push hard together now to set the game up for success for the next 10 or 20 years, which again, when you talk about that succession planning and that long-term strategy that you've alluded to, they say true leadership is when people plant trees under which they'll never sit, if that makes sense.
Yes.
The shade of which they'll never sit, which is hard, especially with politics, because it's like, oh, it's a 4-year cycle, or I need to get it in time because, and even with budgets, for chief fire officers, it's like, I know what the right thing might be to do from a long-term sustainability perspective, but I don't have the money, I don't have the time. I have to bring people with me. So I not have to, I want to also bring people with me, but it must be so difficult. Certainly before we started recording today, we were speaking about bringing people in from different sectors and the value that brings from the neurodiversity aspect of diversity of thought. There are so many people, and we referenced again Nazir Afzal, the reports of the challenges that the NHS are going through at the minute. We're not alone in that. That's something you actually spoke really powerfully about. Like, talk to us a little bit around your background from different sectors and how, whilst our challenges are very serious and need a very big collective effort, we're not alone in this, are we?
No, absolutely not.
This episode is brought to you in partnership with Godiva Limited. Godiva is one of the world's leading providers of specialist equipment for emergency services market. Renowned for innovation, quality and reliability, Godiva produces a comprehensive range of fire pumps, including vehicle-mounted, portable, and their cutting-edge integrated total water flow control system, SAMFlows. I've been using Godiva my entire career as a reliable pump on the fire ground. It is such a crucial element of a successful firefighting team that you want to empower your crews with the very best, reliable, quality product. Reach out to our partners by checking the notes in the podcast. Now back to the show.
If we look at other sectors, at the moment, we see other organisations, other large organisations, the NHS being a prime example, subject to similar headlines to ourselves. And in fact, Nazir, who you just mentioned, undertook a cultural review within fire and rescue, but also within the NHS, and some of the headlines coming out of those were very similar and equally impactful and equally need action. So as you say, we're really not alone in this. There's plenty of other places we could be looking to for partnership and for learning. But just looping back to your first comment there was around...
Sorry, I tend to ask 7 questions at once. It's a bad habit of mine.
Right. No. You
my
also
ADHD getting out of control again.
Yeah, we also talked about leadership and diversity and thinking around that. I'm a firm believer that we lead to serve. So that whole concept of servant leadership, which was first written about in the 1970s, Robert Greenleaf was one of the proponents of that. And so as leaders of fire and rescue now, one of the greatest things that we can do, I think, is to lead to serve, whether that's serving our own people, our staff, or really thinking about the communities that we serve. Because what we're really aiming to do in developing future leaders is support people to find what I would call their own gold. We're not looking to talk about ourselves and our skills, but rather reveal to other people what they could bring to the table, whether that's diversity of thought, neurodiversity, different backgrounds. All of those things will help us to have a more sustainable, community-focused fire and rescue service year on year.
Isn't there something about our vernacular as well, though, and the way we think about? So when you spoke about servant leadership there, have you ever seen the, I'm sure you will, given your travels, obviously there's the typical org structure. Looks like a pyramid, doesn't it? And we talk about this pyramid analogy, and I'm not talking about pyramid schemes. That's a very different and manipulative thing altogether. But pyramid versus a tree. Have you seen that leadership framework? Yes. I always like to try and do that, and I even micro scale it when I'm on a watch as a watch commander. I'm like, I'm responsible, but I don't have to be in charge all the time. I don't have to organise every element of the day. I don't have to do the long screwdriver thing with every micro task that's happening on the watch. I will take responsibility. I'll be the umbrella when it falls. But then when the sun's shining, I'll be nice and narrow. The sun needs to shine on you guys and girls, because realistically, you're doing a lot of the hard graft here.
Yes.
I'm just there to try and catch the rocks so they don't hit you in the head. But that tree, for people that haven't seen it, if you try and invert that pyramid structure and you look at it as yourself, Colette, as an example, in the senior leadership team, you're there at the base of the tree to draw in all the nourishment, all of the development tools, all of the finances, all of the support, the political support to feed us. We are up there against the weather, being beaten every day by the challenges of society, with people having really, really difficult time with their life, socioeconomically challenged, their life is in chaos. And we're out there getting bashed by it every day. And you need to feed us and nourish us mentally, physically, emotionally at times, to empower us to go out there and do the thing, don't we? But it is very embedded in our vernacular, the way we think about this hierarchical structure, isn't it? And I know we've messed about in the fire and rescue service with rank versus role and all this sort of stuff. Like, when you're working with new leaders as part of your organisational strategic development role, what's some of the common mistakes you think, and I know this perhaps wasn't an angle for us today, I'm terrible at doing this, but like some of the common mistakes new leaders make, or if you're mentoring, and maybe perhaps you could give us a framework as a senior woman in the fire and rescue service, because I know a couple of women we spoke to, Sabrina and Dawn and many other chief fire officers we've had on. It is different. You know, as much as we say all leaders should exhibit some... No, leadership is an art form, isn't it? It's not a template, you're a leader, put the leader hat on. Yeah.
Yes, and there's no absolutely right or absolutely wrong way of leading, is there? It's
contextual, isn't it? Yeah.
The beauty of having a diverse range of people in leadership roles is a diverse range of leadership, and all the beauty that brings. One of the things that we often talk about in Essex, though, is an imaginary pair of scales, where we are when we think about the culture of the organisation and a culture that enables people to flourish. So we think on one side of the scales around a culture that is always positive and kind. So are the decisions that you're making and the culture you're enabling positive and kind? That will always be important. Balanced on the other side of the scales with a culture that's also high performing, accountable, and focused on service delivery. There's the service that we provide to our communities. And at different points in the organisational life cycle, those scales will balance in different ways. So we never take our eye off positive and kind. That's at the heart of what we do. But equally, we're focused on high performance service delivery and accountability, personal accountability for the service that we deliver. So you say for new leaders, what do I see? It's one of the things we're really talking about in Essex at the moment, is imagining the balance of those scales. And one of the art forms you describe it of leadership is about balancing those appropriately for the scenario in front of you, I think. Positive and kind,
I love it. And I always say, like, one of my favourite ones, I nearly got it tattooed, actually. I've got so many ridiculous tattoos, it's stupid. It's nice to be important, but it's more important to be nice.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? You don't always have to be. But I think we struggle with that in the fire and rescue service because... So let's take it down to the base level. Brand new man, woman, crew member. They've been in a couple of years. They're going to develop into a new crew manager, crew commander, leading firefighter, whatever their specific terminology in their brigade or service is. And the first step into leadership. And what they'll often be told is they need to get, as an example, the level 1 incident command. We're very command and control focused on what we do. Because we're a fire and rescue service. That's the main thing we do for our community. And in order to do that, I am a commander. We spoke about this before we came on, like when you and I go to different conferences or seminars or whatever, some people wear their rank, absolutely fine. I hate it. And again, people go, oh, bloody hell, Pete, that doesn't matter. It's just a silly little thing. It doesn't. But there's very unlikely at the AFSA conference where we met, am I going to be required to take over an incident? So actually, who cares? And I find it can be a bit of a barrier. But anyway, coming back to that command and control element, how do you help people jigsaw that element of positive and kind when they may or may not be so romantically ingrained in this, I am a manager who commands and controls life-critical incidents? Because, again, we spoke about contextualization before. That's appropriate on a life-saving incident with some tremendous hazards. When you take that same dictatorial approach to a non-operational environment, it can be very destructive. And I don't honestly believe, from all of my travels, the success rate of that transferability is a big spectrum. Some people act that way everywhere, and it's very destructive. To psychological safety is maybe a nice segue in for you, because it's something that you speak very passionately about.
Yeah, we have an enormous responsibility to offer development to aspiring and new leaders, I think, in situational leadership. because as you've just described perfectly, there is absolutely a place for a directive style of leadership in some situations. There's also a need then to adapt that to a different style of leadership in other situations, and that's like any skill, is not something that we should assume is just known and is innate for individuals. Hence the investment that most fire and rescue services make in leadership and development training. And I hope for most that includes the concept of situational leadership. What's appropriate in situation A may not be appropriate in situation B. I'm also an enormous proponent of making coaching available to all staff, and particularly for those in aspiring to a leadership role or those new in leadership posts, because you've probably experienced the same as I have. You might be in a classroom taking hundreds of words of notes, and it all makes sense in the moment and at the time, and then you go to apply it in the moment and you think, it's not quite as straightforward as I expected it to be, or it didn't work.
That's why in all of our conversations on the podcast I try and make things deployable. Like, what's tactical that I can take away from this today, Colette, as I finish listening to you and Pete?
Ground it in reality. What
can I do with that? So on that note, I suppose, could you just zoom in for a second on, people will hear this, coaching, mentoring, and I've had a number of, I've actually had a speaking coach, so the 4 years I've done the podcast, coaches from outside the sector, coaches from inside the sector. What is the difference between a manager, a coach, and a mentor? Because people hear these and sometimes they're used interchangeably. And people will say, Colette, I think it's essential for your future development that you get yourself a coach. And someone else says, no, what you need to be is mentored. And you're like, what's the difference?
Yeah. So as you infer, two very different things. Quick plug for the NFCC coaching and mentoring portal means that any member of staff in fire and rescue can access a coach or a mentor through the portal. So would encourage people to do so if it's not something that you have a specific offer in your fire and rescue service. Coaching tends to be somebody who hasn't walked the path that you have walked, but has the skill of asking the powerful question and encouraging you to reflect upon and identify the answer. A mentor tends to have walked your path before and is able to give insight into the path walked. So that would be my I
think that's perfectly articulated. Because I've acted as a coach for probably over a decade, but I can only really mentor people in some fire and rescue service stuff, addiction, fitness, starting a podcast, or starting a business from like levels 1 to 5. I couldn't tell you how to run a multi-million-pound organization. It would be irresponsible. I could maybe attempt to coach you, but I really wouldn't. I certainly wouldn't suggest that you ask me to, but I could really only mentor you on a very narrow bandwidth of stuff, whereas coaching really is, I think if you just become a great communicator, it's paraphrasing. It's almost a form of low-level counselling-ish, and I don't say that disrespectfully to the professional development counsellors put into it, but learning how to not being afraid of silence, asking open questions, paraphrasing, reframing things for people. Often, because the coaching often implies that the answer lies within that individual, or it's very close at hand. It's probably under one of the books, letters, stones you're yet to overturn in your own environment. It's often not the pasture is greener on the other side, and your future happiness or whatever lies in the future. It probably is where you are right now, and there's a lot of things you can do, but coaching helps people understand that a bit, doesn't it? Otherwise we just keep chasing personal development courses. I was a personal development junkie for like 15 years. I did all the Tony Robbins seminars and NLP and all that jazz, and past a certain point you actually need to start using it, not just like becoming an addict of personal development and reading all the books. Absolutely. But Benjamin Disraeli put it perfectly, I think. He said something along the lines of, and I'm paraphrasing, but in mentoring, you are showing the mentee your own gold, i.e. your own experience. In coaching, you are revealing to your coachee the gold within themselves, i.e. the answers and the experience within themselves. And again, I think that helps to summarise it, which, of course, when we look at the diversity of coaches and mentors we have available to us, leads us quite nicely to the research that I've
have been undertaking about.
Yes. So this was the thing you spoke most powerfully on at the AFSA conference. Take us into the context of your research, the kind of purpose behind it, what gave you the sign of the motivation and the sort of curiosity to understand it greater. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Gore-Tex Professional Fabrics. Now, we all know the working environment of a firefighter is filled with challenges. We face serious risks on the job, such as heat exhaustion, burns, physical and mental stress, and we frequently come into contact with high levels of toxic chemicals. Now, I have been wearing Gore-Tex for nearly 2 decades on the front line, working in hostile environments, tackling challenging incidents from firefighting to water incidents and in urban search and rescue environments. Gore-Tex have a well-earned reputation for protecting professionals in the fire and emergency services through their family of highly innovative, waterproof, breathable moisture barriers that exceeds global performance standards and are trusted worldwide. Gore-Tex, going further together.
So I wanted to explore whether the recent headlines around misogyny, bullying, harassment had affected the ability of women to access positive action, whether it had affected their perception of psychological safety in fire and rescue service. And to explore that, I advertised for participants who had either applied recently for firefighter roles but had not yet been successful, or who had been in firefighter roles and identified as women in the last 3 years. If I'm honest, I didn't expect to get a huge response to the advert. I expected I might have the privilege of talking to 4 or 5 women, and in fact 33 from 14 different fire and rescue services responded. So I was really delighted with that. And
there's nothing worse than when you've got a great premise, but maybe you hit it in the wrong place, or you just didn't get the reach you wanted to, and you're like, I know viscerally people care about this. I just need to find the people.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I am enormously grateful to the women that came forward and spoke so openly and honestly about positive action and psychological safety. The insights they gave have been absolutely phenomenal, and have really led to a clear series of recommendations that fire and rescue services might want to consider and may already be doing. As when we spoke at AFSA, I was saying to you, I think most of what I found was common sense, but perhaps not always common practice. And, I think my role in this is simply to amplify the voice of the women that were kind enough to speak to me and to try to share that common sense more.
So with respect to their identities and their locations and all that jazz, of course, you would never share any of that. But what were some of the maybe expected trends and maybe even some of the surprising insights that gave you these recommendations? Take us through that logic thread of the questions that you asked, perhaps some of the responses that you got, and where you took it from there.
Yes, yeah. So overarchingly, what I heard from the women is that they do feel psychologically safe in their fire and rescue service or in the application process that they're part of. And by psychologically safe, what I mean is that they feel able to learn, to contribute and to challenge in the environment that they are in. And because they feel psychologically safe in the environment, they are therefore able to access positive action. And by positive action, I mean action designed to encourage participation. So that might be things like use of inclusive language in adverts, for example. So I think the headline was arguably surprising, given some of the other headlines we've had recently. In that, as I say, the women I spoke to did feel psychologically safe and therefore able to access positive action, which has an impact on the number of women who are likely to apply for firefighter roles in fire and rescue services. Now, of course, we need to respect and honour the fact that that's not everybody's lived experience.
I was about to say, is there an unseen bias here? Because I try and place myself in the mind of the listener at times when they go, yeah, Colette, but the only people that are going to answer a questionnaire like that are probably already confident people. They go, oh yeah, I'll speak to Colette. I'll have a call with Colette. I'm super confident. I have a positive identity of myself. The ones I always fear the most, and I say fear, I mean, I fear for their lived experience, is those that we end up seeing in the headlines. And even those are a very small percentage. For every one that we see in the headlines, there must be tens or hundreds perhaps of people that it's very uncomfortable, but it's not bad enough to do anything about. And they're probably used to, because if they have these lack of self-belief, self-deprecating beliefs in their professional life, they probably have it in their personal life as well. So this is probably a way they've been used to being treated. I always say you don't get what you deserve, you don't get what's right, you get what you tolerate, unfortunately. And unless, like, we're training each other now. I say this to my partner and to my kids and stuff. I'm like, every time you have an interaction, you're training someone. Colette is training me now how is appropriate to communicate with her, because when I interrupt her, which I have a bad habit of doing, I'm trying to get better, if she doesn't say, actually Pete, could you just stop you there, because I was making a point there, and you didn't. If you don't say that, uncommunicated expectations are premeditated resentments. And like, I think about this in our services. If we don't communicate in a place of psychological safety, in an environment that is open and inclusive, then we don't know what is making someone feel that way. And that will become, over the course of a 30-year career or longer, hopefully, it will become a resentment. I've always been treated this way. You know what? Even since day one, Colette, Pete, John never listened to me. And they kept saying that thing. And then we obviously will go, oh, what did you tell them? Oh, I didn't say anything because they were in a position of seniority. And you go, well, how do you expect them to change then? And that's not a good enough answer, really. It's a and that's why I love the way you spoke about it, and I'll stop interrupting you in a moment, because if this was a simple thing to solve, we'd have done it a long time ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And as part of my research, I went back to 1999, and in 1999 there's a Home Office report which calls out the need for greater diversity in fire and rescue services, and encourages fire and rescue services to undertake positive action. And of course, the diversity of our services has changed in the intervening 25-year period, but not by a huge amount, considering the time that has passed and the effort that has gone into it. But just playing back to the first point you made, which was, is there a bias in the participants of the research? And to that, I would say every experience is one that we can potentially learn from and is valid, and we should absolutely be committed to learning from both the positive and negative experiences, and
don't let progress be the enemy of perfect as well. You know, just because we didn't get 1,000 responses, 33 is fantastic. And okay, we may not have had the person who was sexually assaulted in the workplace, they didn't respond, or maybe they did. Hopefully they did. If they were, it's weird. We'll not go there. But like, do you know what I mean? This is still progress. Don't throw stones at it and go, oh, well, I mean, you only got 33. What, from only 20-something services? You know there's 49 services, right, Colette? Yeah, right, okay, thank you very much. This is still some useful outcomes that you could, if you have a desire to, you could apply some of these recommendations.
There's absolutely a need for more research. And I think the foundation of this research is an enabler for wider scale research based around all of the underrepresented characteristics in our fire and rescue services. Because whilst one might make an assumption, I think it would be a reasonable assumption that the recommendations would apply to other underrepresented characteristics. We don't know that at the moment, because having done an extensive literature review, we know that research doesn't exist yet. So there's a call to action there for somebody who might like to take further research.
The thing is, this is hard stuff to do, isn't it? It's a heavy cognitive lift for someone like yourself who's a busy professional with a family and all that sort of jazz. You know, it's not a thankless task, but it takes a lot of work.
Yeah, we want our research to be academically robust. I think we are used in fire and rescue services. We are good, I think, at making evidence-based decisions. It's one of the things that we do, and our people-based decisions must also, therefore, be evidence-based. And so we need ever more pieces of academic research that inform our thinking and inform our next steps, and in the case of this research, bring out clear themes that tell us both what we are doing well, but also what we could do more of, or that we could do better in. So the headline of this research is that the women I spoke to felt psychologically safe and able to access positive action. There are also clear indicators of what we could do more of, and their experiences weren't universally positive. There is nuance within there, of course, and I imagine we'll go into the detail of that in a moment and think a little bit more about the 4 themes that came out.
This episode is brought to you in partnership with MSA Safety. Today we have them to thank for the improved firefighter safety through connectivity in their brand new connected firefighter system. At the centre of the connected firefighter platform is the MSA M1 SCBA with telemetry. That integrates straight in with the Luna system, which is a wireless all-in-one device creating an independent search and rescue network, providing edge detection, enhanced personal thermal imaging, while simplifying post-scene reporting and data retention. All of this then plugs into the FireGrid system for cloud-based connectivity, real-time information, and data-driven decisions for the incident commander. MSA are truly taking massive strides in the future of improved firefighter safety through connectivity in the brand new MSA Connected Firefighter platform. Now back to the show. So as we're thinking about this, and I wonder if it's a nice opportunity to compare it before we go into the 4 themes, because as you referenced earlier, Nazir did a comparative one. I think when everyone saw the London Fire Brigade report come out, it's very emotive. And for many, many, many people, myself included, actually, maybe not myself included, I think most people would say it wasn't their lived experiences. I regrettably can say that I have had some lived experience of that.
Right.
Obviously, not as a woman in the fire service, but in terms of experiencing elements of bullying, as is probably evident from the podcast. I'm a relatively outspoken person, and I have strong views weakly held. And when I communicate those strong views in the manner in which I do so, that can be perceived at times whimsical and optimistic, and that's not always maybe very popular, and it's had a lot of pushback. Going back to Nazir's work, it's nicer to not be able to hit ourselves with a big stick, because when we talk about inclusivity and positive action and rebalancing a diverse workforce, I like to use the NHS often, and I think maybe Sabrina used it in her book as the gender bias. That maybe, if I'm trying to pull that thread out of my brain. Over the course of 40, 50 years, the success rate of the NHS and nursing, as an example, or even paramedics, although paramedics has been slightly more successful, to get more men into the profession of nursing has really been quite a colossal failure. You'd struggle to frame it as anything but. Because perhaps as a nurturing role, which we might associate nursing with, the etymology of the word would suggest it as such, it tends to attract more women to the profession, I think would be fair to me to say. And the way we've framed firefighting, for better or worse, obviously in its origins it was referred to as firemen, it's a very, 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 very long mindset and ingrained belief system to try and unpick. So when you did see that report about the NHS come out, like, what would success look like in our minds? Are we looking? I mean, I know we're just talking about it from a sexual orientation perspective in this narrow framework of our conversation, but when we look at our available pool, are we looking for an aspiration of 50-50? I don't know. It's the difference between equity and equality, I suppose, isn't it? Like, how do we think about removing barriers versus forcing? Because it was something actually we spoke, and I'll read it now. So there was something around the University of Cambridge where they say positive action is a range of measures allowed under the Equality Act 2010, which can lawfully be taken to encourage and train people from underrepresented groups to help them overcome disadvantages and competing with other applicants. Positive action must not be confused with positive discrimination, which is unlawful. For example, setting of quotas as opposed to targets, which are lawful, and or form a preferential treatment where positive action has been taken to encourage applicants from disadvantaged groups to apply. Every applicant must be considered on individual merit, and selection for interview and appointment must be based strictly on the agreed selection criteria. Do we have targets? Do we have quotas? What do you think?
We don't have either. I think it's. I agree with the definition that you have just read out, but I would put it much more simply and say that positive action is simply about encouraging participation from individuals who are currently underrepresented in our services. nothing more and nothing less, and that encouragement to participate can show itself in lots of different ways. What I learned from the research is some of those positive actions that are most successful and most impactful. As you say, I don't think we have targets. We don't think we have quotas. I think our measure of success is that everyone feels welcome to apply for firefighter roles, and holds a belief that they would be welcome, that they would have a sense of belonging, that they would see role models so that they are clear that the role is possible for them.
Take us into those themes, because you've referenced role model there, and I don't want to keep teasing people and then me interrupting you and dragging you down another rabbit hole, because women in the fire service have that, their sort of tagline is you've got to see it to be it, and I quite like that one, to be honest.
Absolutely.
So take us into those themes and how you see them manifest in our organisations.
And just as an aside, that's a great tagline and is absolutely supported by the research. So the 4 themes that came out were, firstly, support. There are some subheadings there that we'll touch base on in a moment. Role models was the second of 4 themes. Belonging was the third, and behaviours was the fourth. So 4 very clear themes with some really clear recommendations about what we could do more of to enhance the success of those areas. So under the heading of support, the theme of support, the majority of the participants that I spoke to began by saying that they didn't feel that they had been part of positive action. They didn't recognise that they had been part of positive action. What they did say is that they had all felt supported in their applications. So that was enormously important. Most participants expressed some caution relating to positive action, saying things like, I'd be really cautious about targeting a minority group. I'm really clear that roles should be achieved based on merits of the best person for the role, rather than the person holding a particular protected characteristic. And that really plays to the difference that you just articulated, Pete, around positive action, encouraging participation compared to positive discrimination. What we all want is for the best person.
Can I interject there with the voice of the listener? Because I'm going to hit you with some provocative now. Let's go a little bit emotive for a second, because I know we have some very romantic listeners. I always think of myself as a little bit of a sheep in wolf's clothing, which is the reverse. But I'm a 18 stone, 6'5" white male. I'm the poster child potentially for misogyny and whatever. You could see me on the front cover of the Daily Mail having done something horrific. Not that I ever had or would, and anybody that's had any personal reaction to it, but to speak to that. This is predominantly an audio only platform, and I quite like that because it gives me that anonymity. But people, you just said there, people felt like they hadn't been a product of positive action. Was I right in saying that? Right, paraphrasing that? Some people will hear that and go, BS, Colette, because my organisation, my service, my brigade, whoever I work, they ran a day and I, as a white male, wasn't allowed to go. Because they said, actually, Colette, or actually, John, this is only for people of this particular characteristic. And I said, well, how's that fair? How is that fair on me? Why am I being... And that's where they'll say, that's discrimination. And you'll go, no, here's 7 other days available for you. Why can't I go with them? And that's very emotive, and feel free, we can skip past this if you prefer. But could you speak to that angry listener who may be shouting at who listens to the radio now? Well, it's not even on the radio. They're saying it in their internal mind and going, oh no, Pete needs to push back here. So I want to push back in honour of the people that may be frustrated.
Absolutely. So let's talk about that from 2 perspectives, if we may. One is the voice of our participants, which I am seeking to amplify, and the other is the enormous amount of literature around psychological safety and why it's therefore important. So all of our participants were absolutely clear about the need for the best person for the role to ultimately be successful in achieving the role. So the firefighters that we recruit are the best candidates for the job, regardless of background and characteristics. And one of the reasons we ought to be cautious about how we use positive action is to be absolutely sure that perception and reality match in that regard. Having said that, the reason why positive action is still important is that there is still an enormous underrepresentation of women in firefighting roles. And as you pointed out, I don't particularly think we ought to have targets or quotas, but I do think we ought to be ensuring that every member of our community feels able to apply for our roles if it's something that they are attracted to. And positive action, remember, is about encouraging participation, not about giving advantage or fast tracking, for example.
Is there a hypocrisy there? Sorry to interrupt again, but if we say there's a massive underrepresentation and then we say there's no targets, how do we know when there's a good representation? What's the number? It's difficult, isn't it? Because at some point, we must be applying a measure in our head to say if I say there's 3 oranges in that bowl and there's 27 apples, well, there's an underrepresentation of oranges. Okay, Pete, how many oranges do you want? Well, I'd kind of like 50-50 because I like a bit of orange. Whatever, silly, facetious analogy. Yeah. But we must be unconsciously applying a metric when we snapshot look at a group and go, yeah, that's a bit half and half. There's as many blue people as there are purple. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's strange because then if we don't know what success looks like, it's easy when it's business because when we go, because it's a personal thing, it's so emotive, isn't it? But if I said to you, I want as many aerial ladder platforms as we have got turntable ladders, then we go, that's fine. I know what that means. Now the manufacturer might be upset and they might argue that we're discriminating against them financially and creating a monopoly for whatever. But how will we know what good looks like if we don't have a metric? When will this be over? Because it's an eternal cycle, isn't it? And we should always be checking our own unconscious bias when we're looking at this, because it's a very, very, very difficult square to try and fit in that round hole. It is beyond a privilege to be able to bring the Firefighters podcast to you, and we are so grateful for every single person that supports, listens, shares, and follows our journey. But here's the honest truth. It takes a colossal amount of time and work to keep the podcast going. And to help us keep doing it, create more, reach more guests internationally, and make the podcast sustainable, we're asking for you to help. And to do this, we've set up a Patreon page. Now, by joining this, you'll not only support the future of the podcast, but also gain access to exclusive benefits. Now, if you've ever wanted to meet a member of the podcast, buy us a beer, buy us a coffee, and you think anything you've ever listened to on the podcast has been worth £3, that's basically what we're asking you for. By joining our Patreon community, you will get access to every single full episode archive we have ever made. Now, hundreds and hundreds of key documents that we've got in there on fire behaviour, firefighter health, cancer risks, incident debriefs, and so much more. A growing collection of valuable resources to help you learn and grow. So by joining the Patreon for just £3, you'll unlock everything we've ever created alongside discounts on merch, your support in whatever way, dropping it in the WhatsApp group, sharing it on the local newsletter, whatever it is. It's incredibly valuable and we really do support it, and we need it to make it a long-lasting resource, that legacy resource we always talk about for first responders, firefighters, and everybody everywhere who's ever been interested in joining the fire service or who absolutely loves the job. Now, if you're already supporting something, as many people do, it's totally cool. You can still access the podcast for free, and you'll always be able to access all the new episodes for free, but we're asking for your help to make this sustainable. And if you want to do something free, follow us on our YouTube, subscribe to it, rate us on Spotify, whatever platform you listen to, and we want to keep growing, we want to keep sharing the insights, and we want to keep showcasing the incredible work happening in our community and our sector. So if you feel like you want to join the Patreon crew and help us make this possible, head to patreon.com/TFFPC or check the link in any episode podcast notes. Thank you for supporting us. We'll see you on the other side.
So your question was around, should there be quotas or targets regarding diversity of application and diversity of firefighters? And what we know from having engaged with lots of fire and rescue services and with the inspectorate, with the Home Office, that there are multiple views around whether that's something that's desirable or not. And it wouldn't be appropriate for me to speak to what others might think. What I would say from the research that I undertook is that there are significant potential downsides to the introduction of something like targets or quotas. So if we look at some of the psychological reasons that prevent women from applying for firefighter roles, they include things like the concept of othering, which is linked to the need to belong. If we are perceived to have achieved roles because of a target or a quota, that is not going to help a sense of belonging and othering. We know that one of the reasons that people don't apply is the feeling of imposter syndrome. Am I good enough? Am I worthy enough? And that's not uniquely linked to gender at all.
I think it is, because in Serena's book again, like, they speak about men will apply for a job if we've only got 50% or 40% of the desirables. Like, I don't use this all the time. People will be bored of me saying it, but like, if it says, Pete, can you ride a horse? I'll go, it's a big dog, goes a bit faster, blah, blah, blah. I'm sure I can do it. Colette, or another woman, might go, you know what, no, I need to practice riding a horse for 6 months. And because I'm not going to go there and embarrass myself or waste their time.
No.
You know, whereas, so I think it's something like women will only apply if they think they've got 80 or 90% of the required elements.
And I recognise that research. Yes.
Yeah. So that's tough, isn't it? So I do think, like men, we seem to have this sort of delusion or self-belief where we're like, I'm a competent man, I'll nail it, watch.
Yeah.
And if we get it wrong, we're like, it doesn't matter, I'll learn along the way.
So these are some of the reasons why, rather than potentially going down a quota target route, we instead encourage participation, also known as positive action. So a key theme arising from the superordinate theme of support was the benefit of some particular forms of positive action. So fitness days was a great example. That when services ran fitness days that were targeted towards female people who identify as women applicants, they had success. Some of the reason for that was actually related to fitness, but more importantly, it was about a sense of belonging and connection. So what the research would tell us is that for most male applicants to firefighting roles, firefighting has been a lifelong dream. Not all, of course, but the research would say many. Right, so that's interesting. That contradicts full 180 in comparison to female applicants. So for most female applicants, firefighting has not been a lifelong dream. That in part is about our use of gendered language and the fact that our gendered identity and gendered language is set by the age of 7. Huge amount of research around.
Girls play with dolls, boys play with fire engines and police cars and soldiers.
All of those stereotypes. Some of our cartoon figures, etc., unfortunately perpetuate that, and we know that gendered language has a negative effect on women. So the use of fitness days was partly around the fitness itself, but more around building a sense of connection, broadening the understanding of the role of a firefighter. So for many of our participants, it was the breadth of the role of a firefighter that made it appealing. So one of the participants, for example, said it was when the crew started talking about prevention work, going into schools, education, that's when the role became interesting for them, and that's when they became absolutely committed to application. So the role of fitness days targeted at women then is a recommendation, and it's important.
I think we've done that really well at WFS, so I want to give an acknowledgement to Chrissy Downer and the team, and Danny Cotton, and there's a few others. Oh my goodness, it's not Alex Johnson. Who's the other young lady who's Chief Officer of Cornwall?
Kath Billing.
Oh my goodness. Kat, thank you so much, Catherine. I'm sorry. Catherine's been on the podcast. I love her.
Yeah,
my terrible memory. She's massive on her fitness. She's a wonderful ambassador. But Chrissy Downer,
really
alongside the British Firefighter Challenge team and the Cheshire Fire Challenge team, they were blown away by the level of uptake that was at the Women in the Fire Service fitness events. Because again, as you allude to, very rightfully so, it's an environment that's incredibly supportive, incredibly, just sets a really, really, just like I say, supportive, fantastic environment. I think, and again, not to go into too much of a segue, but the level of diversity that the British Firefighter Challenge and the Cheshire and the Welsh has been able to achieve, services would snap their arm off.
Yes.
If they could achieve that same level of it. But there's something very sad about the fact that those fitness organisations, and WFS as an example, WFS doesn't belong to a service or brigade. It's an independent thing. It lives on its own, sort of. Obviously, it advises on many boards and all that sort of jazz. But like, why can't we... People hear WFS, and I'm not going to wax lyrical too much about it, but I've been going for years. I love it. I love it, not inherently just because it's about women. I mean, it's because the environment they create is just the best learning environment. When I go to seminars and stuff...
It's because people feel psychologically safe.
Yeah, when I go to seminars that are predominantly male attended, it tends to be a bit of a flex off. I was going to use a bit more of a sexual reference, but I won't. There's a lot of gotchas. There's a lot of people there trying to gotcha. Trying to say, Colette said ADI when she should have said EDI. Gotcha. And that people are trying to embarrass each other, I found. And certainly for me, like I'm all bark, no bite. Do you know what I mean? I'm a big character to have in a room, and this will actually fold into one of the aspects of positive action I'll speak about in a minute. But like, when you're in the environments at WFS, they're such just great learning environments because everyone's the eternal student, or it certainly appears that way. Everyone's looking to learn together, acknowledge the contributions of others, and it's just a really great learning environment. And it just so happens to have the overarching purpose of women in the fire service. But like, I recognise, just to come back to your positive action and elements of support and creating environments, I know if I'm at an open day for something and I'm in that room, if I'm not careful, I can consume all of the conversation because I like asking questions. That's why I get selfishly now to have someone like Colette alone with me so I can ask her all the questions. Be honest, if this was a room full of people, I'd probably be the same. And I can hijack things, and I need to get better at it, because what I don't recognise in the whole sunshine shadows analogy is like my confidence and like eagerness in an environment can actually overshadow someone else who is just as curious, just as interested, just as enthusiastic. But they're probably more respectful than I am, or they don't have the same neurodiverse tendencies as me. Their filters are better than mine or different. And I can interrupt. So I appreciate like in an environment that doesn't contain people like me would actually be, sad to confess, it might be a more inclusive environment because people like me aren't going to hijack the conversation.
There's benefit in all of those things, though, isn't there? The fact you are perhaps asking questions that others are thinking, but not saying because of the applied filter. So there's benefit in that too. But I think there are three things to take away from the support theme. The first was around the fitness point, but just two others to make sure we don't lose those. The other was around information sharing about the full breadth of the role of a firefighter. So prevention, protection and response, and how attractive that is to applicants. The third point we haven't touched on is reasonable adjustment when in post, and I think this in part applies to women, but arguably to all. Several of the participants talked about when in post the desire for family-friendly, reasonable adjustments, and some services had done that really very well. But I think there remains a perception that we are unable to do that as fire and rescue services. And what I know from some of the participation in the research is that we are not myth busting on that, and there's an opportunity to. So one woman, for example, said to me it was clear that there was no flexibility within the shift pattern, and so.
Yeah, I think it's important that we do have more of those 12-12, day crew and plus, 9 to 5, grey book, green book. It's different to have. It's important to have different working patterns, isn't it? Because that's an unseen barrier for so many people as well, especially if you're of a certain age, men and women, but certainly women who are looking to start a family or have different, just different life circumstances.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to ask you for a second, because we've got support and role models.
Yes.
I think that over the 4 themes you've identified, and I know we're going to go into more depth around belonging and behaviours. Belonging and behaviours are less in the sphere of control, sphere of influence. They're in the sphere of influence of the service, but those things, behaviours and belonging, have to sit within the individual, don't they? They're the long-term things, I feel, from hearing what you've spoken about. Very hard, not impossible, harder for us to embed because a support mechanism we can write into policy, and I can hit Colette with a big stick if she doesn't do it, because it's written in the policy and she has to do it and she has to do the thing and put the days on. Same with role modelling, although role modelling can sometimes be a difficult one because of the hypocrisy of othering. So like I speak to a lot of women in the fire service. Colette, congratulations, you're 27 years of age, you just joined the fire service, you're a single mum. Would you mind if we grabbed you and put you on a fire engine in the middle of our service and city with 5 other women or 3 other women and take some pictures of you? Now, some people will go, of course, yeah, I could have done with some role models when I was younger. You know, Siobhan from London Fire Brigade, we've had her on. She's on Instagram, the Fire Mum. Fantastic ambassador and role model. She gets a lot of hate, unfortunately, on social media. She's a close friend of mine. My heart bleeds for her all the time, genuinely, because she's putting herself out there because it's the thing she wished was available to her when she first started.
Yes.
Because I think it's difficult when women get to a senior leadership position and then talk about their lived experience. I'm like, I want to hear about your lived experience the first 6 months in the job, because that was probably bloody really hard. But how do we avoid othering people and still create that role model? Because I'm trying to say you're not different, but then I want to use you for all my advertisement campaigns.
Yeah.
It's so hard, isn't it?
It is. But this is where I think we need to recognise the full breadth of diversity. So we tell the stories of our people, full stop. Some of those individuals' lived experience will be based around their gender. For others, it will be around their neurodiversity. For others, it will simply be about being a new recruit. So one of the surprising things I heard around the experience of new firefighters in fire and rescue was women talking about their experience as a new recruit. And without exception, they said, I had some difficult experiences. I don't think it was because I was a woman. It was because I was a new recruit. And I needed to recognise, and that again feels like a whole other area of research. We shouldn't have new joiners having difficult experiences regardless of their gender.
It's difficult. It's difficult for any recruit. I think that's what's important to recognise. You allude to there, like, is it difficult because it's me? No, it's difficult for everyone. Now, is it more difficult for you? I don't know.
Everyone.
But you don't know how difficult it was for me.
No.
You know, I had to apply 8 times before I got in. Maybe you got in first time. Siobhan got in first time. Fantastic. You know, but very difficult, because she made a great point. Like you said, we tell the stories of our people. London Fire Brigade did a piece on Mother's Day for all of the mothers in the service. And Siobhan so wonderfully said to them, because she advises with her comms at times, she was like, that's fantastic. I look forward to seeing you do the same on Father's Day. Absolutely. Yeah. Because otherwise it just stinks of othering, doesn't it? You know, we've got to remember that. We've got to remember that. Because otherwise you're alienating 80% of your workforce. Come on. Balance in all things. So we tell the stories of all of our people. We are balanced in our communications, as you say. That's a good example. Mother's Day, Father's Day, and other types of carers also.
We pay as much attention to International Women's Day as we do to International Men's Day. All of those things are important in terms of ensuring a good experience for all.
But it's also an education cycle for the service, isn't it? And people need to have an element of forgiveness for that. A lot of what we do and say is not malice. You know, it's I think it's Harlan's razor or something like that. It's like, don't attribute to malice what could otherwise easily be attributed to naivety or stupidity. And I say stupidity with respect. It's like, you don't know what you don't know.
Recognise the good intent.
Educate me. Okay, I know that now. So we'll do different next time. But don't hit me with your malicious stick and feel like I did this on purpose. No, we didn't.
No.
Come on. You know, educate us. We're all learning. Service is learning. Service isn't the god of knowledge and EDI and equality. We are all learning as an organisation, aren't we?
We are, absolutely. And just to play a little bit more to the point you raised there about the potential for tokenistic images and stories, one of the things that I heard from our participants is that throughout their process, one of the things that made a difference was seeing any other woman as part of the process. So whether that was somebody operational or non-operational, didn't seem to make a difference. It was the presence of another female was perceived to be supportive, and I think that's important in the telling of our stories. So we must, I think, talk about the breadth of careers available in fire and rescue. So, of course, our firefighting roles make up the majority of our jobs, and quite rightly so. But the other careers are also available in fire and rescue that are equally rewarding, and so on. And so we ought to also tell those. Well, you're
a wonderful example of it. People might listen to this and go, "Why is Colette on the Firefighters podcast? She's not a firefighter." No. She is a pivotal part of the cogs of the machine that is the fire and rescue service, and she delivers a valuable role that helps me be the best version of myself when I'm out there at the tip of the sword doing what you as the public perceive as the sole role of what I do. But we're standing on the shoulders of giants. I don't know where, well, I do know because I do the podcast, but most people won't know where all the policies and the procedures and the learning materials and everything that supports me in the delivery of the end product that we perhaps predominantly what the public interact with. But we're not in this alone. It's a bit of a trick. You see the fire engines show up and assume we just arrived on station as these knowledgeable things that go out there and do that. No, we don't. It's like when people go, "Oh, I'm at a barbecue. It's okay. Pete's here. He's a firefighter." I'm relatively useless without all of the stuff that supports me. I've got no fire kit with me. I've not got control on the end of the phone to tell me all the things I don't know. You know what I mean? I'll be useful, but it is a bit of a trick. We can go faster alone, but further together, can't we? And as you say, there's so many valuable grey book roles and green book roles that contribute to what we actually do.
Yes. There's a lovely image somewhere. I must put my hand to it that shows a traditional image of a fire appliance looking fantastic with some amazing firefighters standing in front of it, quite rightly so. But then also lots of the other roles standing around to make up the whole team that got that pump on the run. And you know, a good one from a recruitment perspective, isn't it? To say,
people that do that, they've got a great eye for it, because it's the whole see it to be it. Yes. Well, how do I know they're part of the thing? They're part of the thing.
Yeah, you can contribute.
Do you know what I mean?
You can contribute to
so many roles
in our community.
Yeah, because I think also people join the fire and rescue service and the ambulance and the police very rarely for the income. They join it for the outcome. They join it because they want to help people. And I always like the story of the cleaner sweeping the docking platform at NASA, isn't it? And they're like, "What do you do?" "I put man on the moon." "Do you?" "I thought you sweep the platform." "Yeah, I do." Because if any toxins or bacteria getting to the pod, and my terminology is wrong for anyone that knows more than me, without me doing that, none of it works.
No.
Okay? None of it works.
No.
I am a crucial screw in this massive spaceship. If you're a regular listener to the podcast, then chances are you are big into your own personal development and the development of firefighters around you. So I wanted to remind you of our mobile app Drill Book. This is a free training and development resources made by firefighters for firefighters. Heading on to Drillbook, you will find incident debriefs, radio messages, notes and lines, quick reference guides, quizzes every single day. We've got useful links to the ERG, to Web Rescue, to Jessup, Euro Rescue, 10-second triage, national operational guidance, and not to mention our daily quizzes where you will find questions on extrication, casualty handling, breathing apparatus, fire development, water rescue, rope rescue, you name it. It is the go-to resource if you've got a spare 5 minutes on the firehouse to develop yourself and those around you. Not only that, if you're looking to get into the fire service, we've got advice on there on interview questions, interview answers. You can build your own questioning in there. And again, remember, this is built by firefighters for firefighters. So you can add your own drills in there. You can pick the drills that you find the most favorite. There is literally hundreds of training ideas, hundreds of drills in there. Remember, this app is absolutely free and it grows every single day down to the contributions of our thousands and thousands of users. It's freely available on Android, Apple, and you will find it in the links for this podcast. Remember, it's called personal development. The clue's in the name. You've got to work twice as hard on yourself as you do on the job. So always be growing, always be developing. Now let's get back to the show.
I think that links quite nicely to the feedback around behaviours. So we talked about one of the 4 themes being behaviours, and how important that was for psychological safety. And whilst overwhelmingly there was positive feedback around behaviours and feeling supported, there was also reflections of less positive behaviours.
Definitely.
And we must absolutely listen to that. But something that was said as part of the research was that it felt like training was making a difference. So all of the participants spoke about knowing what their reporting routes were if something less positive occurred to them. And that had come from training. So when we talk about the whole team within fire and rescue, the professionals who've helped to develop that training are part of that. But I think the point I wanted to recognise was that we, in my view, that's something we should be doing more of. So training around what good professional standards look like, what positive behaviours are, what the reporting routes are when things don't go so well.
It's so difficult as we've shrank our services, isn't it, to be able to put enough financial support behind training. Because again, overused term for today from me perhaps is the hypocrisy of, we recognise we're losing a lot of staff, we recognise we're doing a tremendous amount of recruitment, we recognise we're doing a tremendous amount of succession planning and leadership development. So that should be reflected in our financial budget. I mean, you and members of your development team must on a weekly basis be going, I need more people. I need more people. My staff are screaming out for the training. I want to do the training. I don't have the time and I don't have the people. But people don't know, our chief fire officers have a legal obligation to meet their budgets. We can't forecast in the same way that private sector can. We can't borrow from Peter to pay Paul and take a bit out of next year's budget to put it in this year's budget. And I do empathise, or certainly sympathise, with the challenges that chief fire officers and other members of senior leadership teams face, because just because you agree with everything and you know it's the right thing to do, the numbers don't add up. I'm sorry. What do you want me to do? Do you want me to close 3 more fire stations so I can pay for more training? No, because you'll hate me. Do you want me to fire all of the HR staff? Because then you'll have no support, and actually we'll have more cases of people not being able to manage these uncalled. What am I to do? It's horrible. It must be so hard. Some of the meetings you must be part of. It's so difficult.
Yeah. Well, there are difficulties and there are opportunities, aren't there? So I think one of the things that we are all thinking about at the moment is the power of collaboration. So where we need to utilise our funds wisely, and we've always had an obligation to use public funds wisely. Lots of the type of training I'm talking about exists within fire and rescue services already. And if there is a service out there that doesn't have that type of training written with a lesson plan and interactive materials and so on, one would only need to put a shout out on a shared workplace group for several other services to share their materials with no charge attached.
We do a lot of silo working, don't we? It's terrible.
Yes.
We're all trying to do the same problem. We seem to want to do it by ourselves.
I think things like the positive practice portal are beginning to make a difference, I hope, to that. So
help people understand what that is, because we have a big range of listeners that might not know at all what that means.
Yes, so that's come from two places. So the NFCC now has on the website a positive practice portal. Any service and any member of staff can contribute to that. So if you have a product or a practice or a policy that you believe is particularly positive, as the title suggests, you can write about that and upload it to the positive practice portal. Nice. So in Essex, for example, we have something called Safe Share. It's a way of sharing concerns. It was highlighted by the HMI as something that was promising practice, and so I've uploaded it now to the NFCC positive practice portal. So if somebody goes onto the positive practice portal and types in a search for sharing concerns, for example, those materials would pop up onto the screen. So it's a way of sharing our good practice across services, a way of collaborating.
I'm just going to pull that link up because I will put that in actually. Because so this is the National Fire Chiefs Council, because this is one of many, and I may, after our conversation finishes today, ask you for a few links that we'd like to drop in here.
Yes.
So as you've alluded to, and I'll probably just repeat what you're about to say, this is the nfcc.org.uk, improvement support positive practice. So the positive practice portal can be used by the Fire and Rescue Service who are interested in interventions that support communities, colleagues and partners in keeping everyone safe and secure. There's a whole host of interventions which have been developed by one or more of the Fire and Rescue Services to address a particular need, concern or organisational change recognised by the NFCC or the HMI CFRS, which everyone is seeking to please as we all get regularly inspected. These are innovative and positive practices. So you can share information about implementing these interventions, allows others to build on existing work and supports innovation. So we're going to put that link below this. If people scroll down, they'll be able to find that example. Take us back in, because I keep dragging you away from it. Take us back into those belonging and behaviours, because a lot of this, like you say, is very, very difficult to embed, and it really does need to come from the individual, and certainly in terms of the behaviours. And these are long-term things to try and get a positive change on, aren't they?
Absolutely. So the theme of belonging was strong. We would expect it to be, given we all have a basic human need to feel that we belong. There is positive action that we can undertake under the theme of belonging. So some of those things might look like providing opportunities for connections to be built amongst applicants, continuing to share myth-busting examples of the careers of women in fire and rescue services, and continuing to share examples of the inclusive sense of belonging, which does exist in many services. So that sense of team, of contributing to something greater than yourself. So the recommendations really orientate for belonging around those two things, talking about careers and talking about the sense of belonging that exists.
We've covered such a wide spectrum of things, and I want to just take the opportunity now to thank you for entertaining my silly questions and perhaps the voice of the listener, but obviously perhaps there's a lot of my own voice in there as well. I wanted to give us an opportunity now just to summarise some of the things that were spoken about today, give you an opportunity as a summary of the work that you've carried out and the things you're trying to embed alongside your colleagues and your team in Essex now, as people can have as like a nice takeaway as we close our conversation today.
So I think what the research that I undertook tells us is that there is a lot that we're doing right in the sphere of positive action and recruiting firefighters who identify as women. But there is also more that we can do to continue supporting people to feel psychologically safe and able to access positive action. And I think we can't go far wrong if we continue thinking about the four themes of supporting people in their application, providing visible role models, really talking about the sense of belonging that exists in fire and rescue services, and really recognising positive behaviours and addressing negative behaviours. So I think I started off by saying I think most of that is common sense, but not always common practice. I would love us to do more of that, and obviously I'll make the full research available if anybody would like to read more. But overwhelmingly, my thanks. I am simply amplifying the voice of the women that were kind enough to speak.
It's important to do that, to stick our heads above the parapet we're all in this together, and we are trying to make a collective difference. You've no obligation to come on and speak about these things today, and I really do appreciate and want to acknowledge your faith in me and the platform and all that sort of jazz to come on and speak about this, because I don't take it for granted.
Well, you could say exactly the same about all of us, couldn't you? But ultimately we are all here to serve, and anything that any of us can do to further our communities and our people having good experiences has got to be a good thing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time today. Please send my love to the team and your family. And I know you're a very busy lady. Thank you for giving us an hour or two of your time this morning. I really do appreciate it.
No, thank you for the opportunity. It's been good talking to you.
The Firefighters Podcast was created to recognise, acknowledge, inspire, and hopefully even motivate these incredible individuals who have chosen to be part of the first responder community. Our driving purpose is to create a legacy resource for the current and future generations of firefighters and first responders. We get some incredible feedback from listeners and guests, and as the podcast grows, our desire to create longevity and sustainability means that we are asking for the support of our listeners. If you want to support the podcast, if you want to get discounts to our merchandise, hoodies, clothing, coins, patches, tallies, and also access to all of the incredible documents get shared with us from our podcast guests and sector leaders, then please head over to our Patreon page, and for just £3 a month, you can support the future of the podcast. Please finally hit that follow, subscribe, or rate button on the platform you're listening, and wherever you are in the world, please support your emergency services responders, and thank you for listening.